He signed the papers with a smirk, the gold nib of his fountain pen scratching loudly against the document that ended our 7-year marriage. Outside, a blizzard was battering the glass walls of the 60th floor conference room, turning the New York skyline into a blur of white static. Inside, the silence was absolute. Dominic Sterling did not look at me. He checked his watch, a heavy platinum chronometer that cost more than my first car, and immediately picked up his phone. I knew exactly who he was texting. He was messaging Bianca about their weekend in Aspen. "There," Dominic said, sliding the papers across the mahogany table without making eye contact. "It is done. You have 30 days to vacate the penthouse, Serena. I am listing it next month. The market is too hot to let it sit empty." He stood up, adjusting his silk tie, looking at me like I was a piece of depreciated furniture he was finally sending to storage. "Try to find something smaller," he added, his voice dripping with faux pity. "Maybe a studio near the museum. It fits your dusty little life better. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from right now. Are you in a snowy city like this one or somewhere warm? I'd love to see who is tuning in today." Dominic reached for his cashmere coat, already mentally halfway to the private airfield. He thought he was the protagonist of this story, the high-powered vice president of development cutting loose a boring, unambitious wife. He thought he was liberating himself from dead weight. He had no idea he was standing on a trapdoor I had built before we even met. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Judge Keats said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking oak. She was a woman who had seen empires rise and fall, and she had no patience for men who thought they were gods. Dominic paused, a frown creasing his forehead. "I have a flight to catch, Judge. The divorce is signed. We are done here." "The divorce is signed," Judge Keats corrected, sliding a thick, cream-colored envelope onto the table. "But the division of assets requires full disclosure of all significant financial shifts. And as of 72 hours ago, your wife's financial status has changed." Dominic let out a short, derisive laugh. "Did your mother leave you her collection of antique thimbles, Serena? Or maybe that old brownstone in Brooklyn? Keep it. I do not want anything from your side of the family. I just want out." I did not speak. I simply watched him. I watched the way he dismissed me, the way he dismissed my family, the way he dismissed the very history that allowed him to exist. Judge Keats broke the red wax seal on the envelope. The sound was sharp, like a bone snapping in the quiet room. "This is the testamentary trust execution for the estate of the late Victoria Vance," she read, her eyes scanning the page. "As the sole surviving heir, full control of the Vance family trust has been transferred to Serena Vance." Dominic rolled his eyes, checking his phone again. "Congratulations, Serena. Enjoy the trust fund. Can I go now?" The trust, Judge Keats continued, her voice dropping an octave, holds a controlling interest in a diversified portfolio of global assets valued at approximately $180 billion. Dominic's thumb froze over his screen. The room seemed to tilt. $180 billion, he whispered, the number feeling foreign in his mouth. "That is impossible. That is sovereign wealth territory." "The portfolio includes the Vantage Group, Highland Logistics," the judge read on, relentless, "and the controlling majority share of Obsidian Capital Partners." Dominic went pale. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a magic trick. Obsidian Capital Partners was not just a company. It was the conglomerate that owned the development firm Dominic worked for. It was the entity that signed his paychecks. It was the landlord of the building we were sitting in right now. "That is a mistake," Dominic stammered, his arrogance fracturing. "Obsidian is owned by a blind trust. The board is run by a proxy, a woman named V. Moore." "Vance," I said. It was the first time I had spoken since he entered the room. My voice was calm, devoid of the anger he expected. "Serena Vance, V. Moore was just the name on the login." Dominic stared at me. His eyes were wide, searching my face for the quiet, submissive wife he thought he knew. But she wasn't there. "You hated V. Moore," I continued, leaning forward slightly. "I read your internal memos, Dominic. You called her a dinosaur. You called her a blind relic who was blocking your progress because she refused to approve your high-risk zoning shortcuts. You spent 2 years insulting your boss to her face without ever seeing her face." "You," he rasped, gripping the edge of the table. "You were on the board." "I was the board," I corrected him. "You thought my silence was submission, Dominic. But in a panopticon, the observer must remain silent to see the prisoner's true nature. I wasn't just sitting in the background at those dinner parties. I was auditing you. And you failed every single test." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy like the air in a vault just before the door swings shut. Dominic sat there, his mouth slightly open, looking at me as if I were a stranger he had passed on the street 1,000 times but never truly seen. He was trying to reconcile the quiet woman who organized his socks with the chairwoman who had vetoed his riskiest acquisition proposals for the last 24 months. I watched the realization hit him in waves. It wasn't regret. It was calculation. He was rewinding the last 7 years in his head, looking for the clues he had missed, but he wouldn't find them because he never looked down. People often assume that those who serve do so out of necessity. They mistake silence for a lack of agency. Dominic believed that because I spent my days preserving history in dusty archives, I was living in the past. He called my work quaint. He called my passion for structural integrity boring. To him, architecture was about the facade, the glass, the height, the shine. He had built his career on what business analysts call the glass cliff. He thrived on volatility, taking high-risk, high-reward gambles that looked brilliant when they worked and catastrophic when they failed. And whenever he teetered on the edge of that cliff, whenever a deal threatened to collapse under the weight of his own ego, he assumed it was luck that saved him. It wasn't luck. It was me. For years I had been the invisible hand steadying the ladder he was climbing. When he proposed the Hudson Yards expansion, I was the anonymous vote that forced a mandatory environmental audit, saving the company from a billion-dollar lawsuit 6 months later. When he wanted to gut the pension fund to inflate the quarterly dividends, I was the one who quietly blocked the motion in the dark hours of the morning while he slept beside me. I inverted the dynamic. He thought he was the builder, and I was the accessory. In reality, he was the liability, and I was the bedrock. I didn't hide my identity to trap him. I hid it because my mother taught me that money changes the way people look at you. It turns love into a transaction and loyalty into a strategy. I wanted to know if he loved Serena, the historian, or if he would only love Serena, the heiress. He answered that question the day he missed my mother's funeral to attend a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a strip mall in Jersey. He told me it was just business. Sitting in that cold boardroom, I looked at the man who had treated my life as an obstacle to his ambition. He thought he was the architect of our future. He had no idea he had just handed the blueprints to the demolition crew. Dominic did not apologize. Men like him do not experience shame. They only experience a loss of leverage. He stood up, buttoned his cashmere coat with trembling hands, and walked out of the mediation room without another word. The door clicked shut, and the blizzard outside seemed to swallow him whole. But the war wasn't over. It was just moving to a different battlefield. 10 minutes later, as I sat in the back of my town car, watching the city freeze over, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the Market Watch, a vicious financial gossip blog that Dominic read religiously. The headline hit my screen with the subtle grace of a sledgehammer. Unstable heiress threatens market stability. Is the new owner of Obsidian Capital having a mental breakdown? I opened the article. It was anonymous, citing insiders concerned for the company's future. It painted a portrait of a chaotic emotional leadership transition. It claimed the new chairwoman was a scorned wife, acting out of hysteria and using the company to settle a personal score. It didn't name Dominic explicitly, but it described his situation perfectly, framing him as a martyr of corporate nepotism, a brilliant executive being purged by a vindictive ex-wife. Then came the text message. It popped up at the top of my screen, the sender simply listed as Dominic. You might own the building, Serena, but I own the narrative. The board hates instability. If the stock drops 10 points by tomorrow morning, they will force a vote of no confidence before you even get your keycard. Settle now. Give me the severance package or I burn your mother's legacy to the ground. I stared at the screen. I didn't feel the sting of betrayal. I didn't feel the urge to cry or scream or call him to beg for a truce. All I felt was a cold clinical clarity. He was proving me right. He wasn't interested in the company. He was holding it hostage. He thought this was a chess match. He thought he could bluff me into folding by threatening the one thing he knew I cared about, my family's reputation. But he had made a critical error. You don't threaten a historian with the past. We know how to dig. I didn't reply to his text. I didn't draft a press release to deny the rumors. I simply opened my laptop and logged into the Obsidian secure server. I typed one email to the head of the IT department. Subject authorization for Level 5 forensic audit. Body isolate all servers. Mirror the hard drives of the Vice President of Development. Grant access to the external forensic team immediately. I pressed send. He wanted a war of words. I was going to give him a war of data. Walking into the headquarters of Obsidian Capital Partners was usually a quiet affair. I would sign in at the front desk as visitor, wait for Dominic to finish his calls, and sit on the plush leather sofa unnoticed by the staff. Today, the atmosphere was different. It was the difference between a library and a bomb shelter. As I crossed the marble lobby, conversation died. Phones were lowered. The security guard, a man Dominic had walked past for 5 years without acknowledging, straightened his tie and nodded to me. He held the elevator open. He knew. Everyone knew. The boring wife was now the person signing the checks. I didn't go to Dominic's office. I went to the executive suite and summoned Bianca. She arrived 5 minutes later, looking like she was walking to the gallows. Bianca was 26, brilliant at spinning crises, and currently terrified that her career was about to end before lunch. She clutched her handbag like a shield. She expected the scorned wife to scream about the affair, to throw water in her face, to demand details about Aspen. I didn't offer her a seat. I stood by the window, looking out at the blizzard that was burying the city. "I am not interested in your personal life, Bianca," I said, keeping my back to her. "I am not interested in the texts, the weekends, or the lies. Those are emotional debts and I have written them off." I turned to face her. She blinked, thrown off balance by the lack of rage. "I am interested in my company," I continued. "Dominic is using firm resources to run a smear campaign against the majority shareholder. That is corporate malfeasance. If you are involved, you are liable. If you are merely following orders, you are a witness." Bianca swallowed hard. She was smart enough to know that loyalty to a sinking ship is just a fancy way of drowning. "He told me to release the article," she whispered. "He said if we painted you as unstable, the board would panic. He made me draft the press release for tomorrow. He gave me the files." "Give them to me," I said, extending my hand. She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a silver flash drive. "This is everything," she said, her voice shaking. "The drafts, the media list, the strategy emails. He told me to keep a backup in case IT locked him out. He said it was his leverage." She thought she was handing over the evidence of a PR war. She thought she was trading gossip for immunity. She had no idea she was handing me the nuclear codes. I took the drive. It felt cold and heavy in my palm. "You can go, Bianca. HR will be in touch regarding your severance." She fled the room. I looked at the silver stick in my hand. Dominic was arrogant, but he was also lazy. He didn't like carrying multiple drives. If he told Bianca to back up his leverage, he hadn't just backed up the press releases. He had backed up everything he was afraid to lose. The forensic audit didn't happen in a boardroom with mahogany tables. It happened in the sub-basement server room, a space that hummed with the aggressive sound of cooling fans and the invisible flow of data. It was sterile, cold, and brutally honest. Numbers don't lie. They just wait for someone to ask the right questions. I sat next to Kieran, the lead forensic accountant I had hired an hour ago. He was a man who looked at spreadsheets the way an artist looks at a canvas. He had the flash drive plugged into an isolated terminal. "We found the PR files," Kieran said, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the monitor. "Nasty stuff. But that's not the problem." "What is the problem?" I asked. "The drive wasn't just a backup of the smear campaign," Kieran explained, typing a command that flooded the screen with cascading data. "Mr. Sterling did a full user profile dump before he left the office yesterday. He copied his entire My Documents folder. He probably didn't even check what was in the subdirectories." Kieran clicked on a folder labeled Riverside, Internal. "I've been cross-referencing his quarterly reports with the raw data on this drive," Kieran said. "Look at this. For the last 12 quarters, Dominic has reported a 98% occupancy rate for the Midwest commercial properties. That triggered his maximum performance bonus." He pointed to a column of red numbers on the right side of the screen. "But the actual bank deposit records show rental income consistent with only 82% occupancy," Kieran said. "There is a 16% gap. That's about $4.8 million in missing revenue." "He was phantom leasing," I said, the realization settling in my chest like ice. "He was marking units as occupied in the system to hit his targets, then moving maintenance budgets around to cover the revenue shortfall." "Exactly," Kieran nodded. "He was robbing the building maintenance fund to pay his own bonus. He stripped the assets to paint a pretty picture for the board." I stared at the screen. This wasn't just negligence. It wasn't just bad business. It was fraud. It was a federal offense. Dominic thought he was fighting a divorce battle. He thought he was negotiating alimony. He didn't realize he had just crossed the line from civil court to criminal court. And more importantly, he had triggered the trap I didn't even know was waiting. "Print it," I ordered, standing up. "Print it all. And find me the employment contract template from 2021, the one Dominic insisted we use for executive hires." Kieran looked confused, but I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a historian who had just found the smoking gun in the archives. "There is a clause," I said softly. "The Sterling clause." He wrote it himself to fire a rival. "It says that any executive found falsifying data forfeits all severance and vested stock options." Dominic wanted to burn my legacy. Instead, he had just incinerated his own golden parachute. The boardroom doors opened with a heavy, pressurized hiss. Dominic walked in, flanked by his lawyer, looking less like a man facing an audit and more like a conquering general arriving to accept a surrender. He threw his briefcase onto the mahogany table, the same table where my mother had signed the original incorporation papers 40 years ago. "Let's make this quick," Dominic said, not bothering to sit. He didn't look at the board members lining the walls. He looked only at me. "My team has prepared the separation agreement. $6 million in severance, immediate vesting of all stock options, and a non-disparagement agreement binding the company from commenting on my departure. Sign it, and the blog post about your mental instability disappears. Refuse, and tomorrow morning I give an exclusive interview to the Wall Street Journal." He leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. "Sink or swim, Serena. Isn't that what I always told you?" I didn't flinch. I didn't look at his lawyer. I pressed a single button on the console in front of me. The lights in the room dimmed, and the massive screen behind me roared to life. It wasn't a settlement offer. It was a spreadsheet, specifically the raw data from the Midwest region occupancy logs. "Sit down, Dominic," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden darkness of the room it was the only thing that mattered. He frowned, squinting at the screen. "What is this?" This is internal data. You can't show this." "Column C," I said, pointing the laser remote at the red figures. "Reported occupancy 98%. Actual revenue 82%. You've been falsifying the books for 3 years to trigger your performance bonuses. That is $4.8 million in theft, Dominic." The room went dead silent. Dominic's lawyer slowly closed his folder, stepping a few inches away from his client. That's a clerical error," Dominic stammered, his face flushing a blotchy red. "I can explain that. It's creative accounting. Everyone does it. You can't fire me for hitting targets." "Actually," I said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the polished wood toward him, "I can, and I don't even have to pay you to leave." He looked down. It was a photocopy of an employment contract amendment from 3 years ago. "Do you remember this?" I asked. "You wrote it yourself. You called it the Zero Tolerance Initiative. You used it to fire Marcus, that junior VP who threatened your promotion track. You insisted that the board add a specific clause for all executive officers." I read it aloud, my eyes never leaving his. "Any executive officer found to have knowingly manipulated financial data to influence compensation forfeits all rights to severance, deferred compensation, and unvested stock options. Termination is immediate and for cause." Dominic stopped breathing. He stared at the paper. He stared at his own signature at the bottom. "The legal team calls it the Sterling clause," I said softly. "You built the trap, Dominic. You sharpened the spikes." The arrogance didn't just leave him, it evaporated. This wasn't anger, it was a total structural collapse. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his hands, then at the door, then at me. The man who had terrorized the office for 5 years, the man who had called me dead weight, suddenly looked very small. He realized that the $6 million he was counting on, the money for the condo, the Aspen trips, the life he felt entitled to, was gone. He wasn't just fired. He was liquidated. "Security," I said into the intercom. "Please escort Mr. Sterling to the lobby. He has no personal effects to collect." Dominic didn't fight. He didn't scream or make a scene. When the 2 guards stepped forward, he simply deflated, allowing himself to be guided out of the room like a guest who had overstayed his welcome at a party he was never really invited to. The heavy doors clicked shut behind him, sealing the silence. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The blizzard had stopped. Below the city of New York was a sprawling grid of amber lights, a vast ocean of electricity and ambition. I reached into my bag and pulled out the old yellowed blueprint I had saved from the archives, the original keystone drawing of this very tower. Dominic had used it as a coaster for his scotch. I placed it in a frame on the desk. Revenge is a fire that burns everything it touches, including the person holding the torch. But justice is just clarity. It's the rain that washes the dirt off the pavement. I hadn't destroyed Dominic. I had simply applied his own rules to his life. I had removed the rot so the foundation could stand. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I wasn't just a historian. I was the architect of my own life. In the end, he built a monument to his ego, but I built a legacy. If you believe that true power is quiet, make sure to like and subscribe to see more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, what's the one thing you've built that you're proud of? I'll be reading.